Hello, Kai. How's it going?
Good, thank you. I'm now in the parliament and had a busy day working on the AI Act.
Okay. What's a typical day like for you working on the AI Act?
Well, it depends a little bit. We have often 2 or 3 times a week official meetings or informal meetings where we are really meeting with other political groups. But then there are also some days to prepare those meetings, to prepare wording, so for the new law, but then also meetings with stakeholders, going to events, and so on. So it's really a lot of different tasks. But at the moment, what is really dominating is the work on the text, so on the future AI Act.
Interesting. And I guess for the audience, before we jump into that, to following on that, do you want to give a quick intro about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Kai Zenner, I'm now since 2017 working in the European Parliament for MEP Axel Voss, Conservative Party, and we are, well, I think since 2018 or 19, really focusing our work on artificial intelligence and all the European attempts to regulate it and to promote it, make it safer, and so on and so on. And it's quite a riot, a lot of very heated discussions. And now it seems like the European Union is coming closer to really adopt the AI Act at the end of the year. And let's see.
We'll see. That's interesting. So, and also for the audience, I guess, and if you were to summarize the AI Act, like what is the AI Act and what's the intent of the AI Act?
Yeah, it's a good question because the European Commission, so here in Europe, the institution that is really preparing the law, started with, I would say, two main objectives. The first objective was to make AI safe, especially for consumers, for citizens. So, to really make sure that artificial intelligence technologies are in line with our fundamental rights here in Europe. And the second pillar, or the second key objectives, was to promote the deployment of artificial intelligence and innovation in AI and so on. Unfortunately, I would say the Commission then shifted more and more in the safety direction, and the AI Act is really a product safety legislation and focusing really on risks. And unfortunately, let's say, promoting AI and also underlining the positive aspects that AI can have, for example, in saving energy, making our traffic safer, helping older people with some robotic stuff or some other automatism and so on. This is not really a part of our EU legislation anymore. So we find it always from our political group a bit sad that it's really only about risk, 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 and not so much about how we can use AI to make our life better a little bit at least.
That is interesting, and I would definitely want to dive into that. To back up, so you said that before you give your intro, that you're working on more of the technical aspects
Yeah.
of the AI Act right now, and I think this will sort of bridge into what you're just talking about. But what are first describe the technical aspects you're looking at? Maybe we'll start there.
Yeah.
What are some of the major areas that's under consideration for the act?
It's really difficult to reply to that, and I think the EU realized that they made a little bit of a mistake on a conceptual level with the AI Act, with the proposed AI Act by the European Commission, because this AI Act is another horizontal legislation piece. So with this law, they really want to cover all kind of AI technologies, no matter if they are being used for example, in a connected car or in a smart grid system or in healthcare, in education, whatsoever. And as you know, AI is not AI. So every AI
Yeah.
technology in a lot of different sectors have completely different level of risk, of opportunities, of certain characteristics, and so on. So going back to your question now, to talk about certain technical requirements, for example, when it comes to the data set, and then demanding that every and each data set needs to be, for example, fair, so cannot be discriminatory, needs to be balanced, needs to include all kind of different groups in the society, and so on. Sounds at first quite good, and everyone would say, yeah, makes sense. For example, if you are talking about the use of AI in the decision if you are able to access a public service, for example. No one wants to have discriminations there. But if you are using AI for medical research, and you are, for example, creating some medicine, a drug for pregnant women, then of course my data doesn't matter because I'm not a woman, and therefore
Right.
all those technical requirements are, they are often not easy to answer. And in our sessions, or in our legislative work, we are then talking in depth about what I said, for example, how a data set should look like, how technical documentation should look like, if there should be a general rule for making recordings, so about the operation of an AI system, and so on. And as I said now already, we came very often to a conclusion that those very general requirements that look nice on at a first glance often then do not really make sense to apply them now to every AI technology. And this is basically one of the most important points that we are discussing again and again and again, and in the end trying to really figure out what makes sense, what doesn't make sense.
Interesting. This brings up, I think, a question that a lot of people who aren't working on the act, like, well, a lot
Yeah,
of my friends
yeah.
who work in the AI space and machine learning space. The big question is, okay, so you're looking at all these technical aspects and trying to come up with all these cases, but how do you future proof and generalize in a space that changes so quickly?
Yeah, almost not possible. So again, I think especially the first proposal from the European Commission tried to do it. So again, tried to come up with principles that are then applicable for every AI system in every sector, every use text and context, and so on and so on. But now we kind of changed the systemical approach, I would maybe phrase it, in the AI Act to indeed make it future proof. And now we wrote some general principles that are indeed applicable to every use case, but they need to take into account all the time the specific context of deployment, technical specifications, harmonized standards, um, sectorial backgrounds, and so on and so on. It makes everything much more complicated, and it needs it requires also a lot of additional layers, for example, for every sector. But on the other hand, it makes sure that every AI system only in the end needs to fulfill what is doable and what makes sense. So in the end, we will have probably in the European Union something which is not so different to the AI Bills of Rights in the United States. So a really high level framework that is then being applied sectorial, and in every sector and every use case, let's say, the level of application and what exactly needs to be fulfilled will differ a little bit. And I think, honestly, it's the only way how to do such a horizontal piece that is really trying to cover all those different technologies that do fall under this buzzword that AI is.
Interesting. But then how do you balance that against, as you're saying, the introduction of safety and risk? People start focusing more on that as well. So
Yeah,
you have this sort of this sort of generalized rubric of technologies and use cases, but then you throw on top ethics and risks. I mean, this seems like it's a lot to juggle.
yeah.
Um,
No, definitely. It will only work if the European Union is really developing very, very, very good harmonized standards. So here we have a main standardization body called Zenner, and Zenner is often taking the internationally agreed ISO standards into account, maybe refining them a little bit. But first of all, Sensenelec would need to make very, very good horizontal harmonized standards. And then Sensenelec would also need to do sectorial standards, so vertical standards that are, again, what I said already, taking into account the horizontal technical rules, let's say, and then trying to adapt them to each sector. And yeah, I think it will be the only chance to really translate what we have in this high level AI Act in guidance, technical standards or harmonized standards, and yeah, maybe also some rule books and maybe code of conducts and so on. So the AI Act is a little bit a different kind of digital law. In the past, the European Union made often very strict rule books, but I think, yeah, and with your questions, you several times addressed it already. We kind of realized that nowadays everything changes so fast, and there are so many different actors that with our traditional lawmaking approaches, we are not anymore able to really keep up with this pace. And then let's say those general principles and then being translated down in standards, in guidance, in code of conducts, and so on and so on, we see nowadays as the only chance to make our legislation future proof. And I'm often very critical when it comes to EU lawmaking, but I think this is actually a good new approach that we are trying out now.
Yeah, I mean, walk me through this because I remember I live in America, and I remember when GDPR came out, and as an American working in technology, that was very interesting. I distinctly remember what was this date here. I just typed it in. It was May 25th, 2018. And so
Yes,
on that
exactly.
day, every company was in the US was basically scrambling to figure out how they're going to suddenly comply with
Yeah,
GDPR. And I saw a lot of, it was interesting. I saw a lot of very um, I would say reactionary type of things. Like some people were just deleting all their data that was older than 90
yeah,
days. And they're just
yeah,
like, fine, whatever.
yeah,
So, because nobody knew what was going to happen, right? They're like, oh, I don't know if the GDP, I don't know if the EU is going to come on every single company or if they're just targeting big tech companies or, who's going to feel the wrath of the EU. And so everyone sort of scrambled to do this. I got a couple questions related to GDPR. First of all, like, why wasn't GDPR enough? Like, why do we need an AI Act?
yeah. Well, I think there are a lot of possible replies to this question. First of all, unfortunately, in the EU, there are also a lot of very interesting, let's call them interesting policymakers, like, for example, the president of the European Commission or the vice president, so von der Leyen, Vestager, Breton, and so on, that have a very strong opinion and yeah, objectives, policy objectives, and for them, having an AI Act is something that you can sell very good in political terms, and you will get a lot of PR out of it. It's a flashy new law that is just generating a lot of interest, and unfortunately, our policymakers here in the European Union lost a little bit. Yeah, we are using here normally quite strongly the OECD concept on better regulation. So we really want to make sure that all the laws are working together very well and so on. But unfortunately, nowadays, it's more about making a new shiny proposal that is
Mm.
generating a lot of interest, and not going into a direction where you are just updating existing legislation. Because what you were saying would have been possible. We could have updated the GDPR on AI. We could have used the general product safety law that is also currently or has been updated. We could have added there some AI provisions. We could also have further updated sectorial legislation like medical device regulation and so on and so on. But again, I think for political reasons, a new
Interesting.
AI Act has been chosen. And yeah, I would say this is probably even the main reason why we
Mm.
have this law.
It makes actually that's an interesting answer, and it makes sense because the more I started looking at the AI Act and versus GDPR, I'm like, well, to your point, why couldn't you just amended the current
Yeah,
law that's already been that everyone knows about versus this new one? Because it's freaking people out in America, for
yeah,
example, you know,
no, of
and
course.
because we're just like, okay, so like the Europeans, I mean, there's a, I want to get your take on this too. When I was in Paris a few months ago, I was keynoting a talk there, and somebody came up to me afterward and said, because I think they brought me in because they wanted the American perspective on business and technology. And the thing I noted was, you know, the Europeans, they tend to move a lot slower than the Americans, and maybe that's a feature, maybe that's a bug, but it is what it is. And so somebody came up to me afterward and said, you know, the EU regulates and the US innovates, right?
Yeah,
I thought a
yeah,
lot about that. It's an interesting take, but I do notice a lot of regulations. Like we're not the U.S. isn't the one coming up with a lot of this stuff. I think we to the extent that we do, it's typically lobbied to death,
yeah.
to the point where it's just it doesn't really mean anything. So, but in the EU, you guys seem to take it a lot more seriously. But I am wondering like what do you think this does to innovation? Because it seems like you
Yeah.
had GDPR, now you got this, and you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah, I think in the end, probably a wiser approach would be something in the middle. So, in the middle of US approach and European Union
mhm.
approach, because we indeed, there, I share your opinion or your assessment, we are over regulating. We are now thinking already about how to regulate the metaverse or virtual worlds
Whoa,
and so on, even though, in my opinion, the metaverse looks a little bit dead at the moment. So I do not know if this is really smart to regulate already. But yeah, it's a little
really?
bit the mindset in the European Union that from the beginning you need to have strict rules. And again, I agree with you that it's often leading to a situation where it's too strict, and especially at the beginning, okay, maybe you should have guidelines or guidance, but in order to innovate, especially at the early stage, you should have a lot of freedom. And I think the American approach there to really focus at this time on investments, on connecting different actors, to also link researchers with businesses quite strongly and so on, makes a lot of sense. Here, many companies knowing the European Union, they are really waiting for the Commission and for the Parliament and the member states to come up with a law, and only then they are starting the innovation process. And yeah, often we are then really way too late and never able anymore to catch up with Chinese companies, with US companies, and so on and so on. So yeah, it's really, I think, a combination of a lot of points, but a lot is about the different mindset.
Hmm. Has that always been a characteristic of the EU and the way it operates, or I guess maybe
Yeah.
European governments? Again, I'm
Yes.
American. I'm very
Yeah.
clueless about this stuff. So
No, I think it is. I think it's actually really a characteristic of especially Western European countries, of yeah, Germany especially. So in my home country, it's really something normal. I think a lot of people would actually feel rather unwell with the situation where you are saying, okay, innovate freely now, and the rules are coming later. In
yeah,
Germany, we want to know where we can go, and we need this kind of legal guidance. But again, I think the truth is often in the middle, or the best approach is in the middle. So I do believe that we should grant our companies, our researchers, a little bit more freedom at the beginning. And again, maybe this new development in lawmaking, that we do believe and that we do trust more on technical standards, on code of conduct, binding corporate rules, public and private partnerships, and so on. Maybe it's a good middle way. But
hmm.
yeah, if it's playing out, if it's working, we will only see in the next years.
Oh yeah, yeah, you will actually. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting too because you're trying to anticipate for a future that is exponentially increasing,
Yes.
in complexity, and
Yeah.
and as we're kind of talking about, before the first started recording too, there's so many factors in the world right now
Yeah.
that it's a crazy place. I think unlike we've seen in a long, long time, maybe ever. Because you throw in the component of AI, for example, in
Yeah.
technology, and that was something you just didn't have to worry about back in other hectic days like the Great Depression and so forth. But
Yeah.
this is
True.
just it's there's just a lot of complexity. But I mean, and kudos for trying to or I say, kudos to American word. Congratulations for trying to, I guess, get ahead of that because
Yeah.
it's, I think but actually, a friend of mine wanted me to ask, what would have to happen in the AI space to make you comfortable with no regulation at all in AI?
I think for the European Union, this is basically impossible. Again, we talked already about the mindset, and again, I think most European countries really do want rules, and even our companies, our universities right now, they are saying, okay, we are maybe not happy with the current stage of the AI Act, but we, in the end, we all want to have an AI regulation. So I think here are really not a lot of players in the market or in politics that are saying the best outcome is no AI Act, and
Mm,
then we see what the future will bring. But yeah, one of the things that you were touching up on now in your question is really, with the AI Act, we see it constantly how fast everything is changing, and foundation models, so those things behind ChatGPT, so AI chatbots now that are more and more frequently used. Um, they were not on the radar of lawmakers here
right.
in the European Union in 2018, 2019, when the prep work of the AI Act started. And suddenly now there's a new discussion how to include generative AI. Does it make sense? Can we prevent maybe another situation of market dominance by a few powerful upstream companies? Or will we have again a situation where everyone is using kind of iOS and Android, where there are
Mm.
two basically powerful platforms, and then you have basically only those two decisions, and all those questions are then suddenly coming, and then there's always the question now for the lawmaker, do we need to change? Do we need to restructure our law? Again, it's I think a lot of points are speaking for for this approach of having really flexible general principles that you can kind of bend, taking into account different use cases, different situations, and so on. And maybe one point that you were mentioning in your GDPR question, where I think the European Union is now trying to learn a little bit from mistakes that happened back then, because what happened in the United States was happening here as well. So there were a
Mm.
lot of school classes that didn't take pictures anymore from the students because they were thinking this is not in line with the GDPR. And we had a lot of legal uncertainty. We had also a lot of fragmentation across Europe. So member states interpreting the GDPR in complete different ways. And now with the AI Act, we are trying a more centralized approach, where we have a lot of European guidance, again, the harmonized standards that are applicable for the whole European Union and so on, to not face similar situations like, you said it in 2018. And companies also in Europe still struggle to be fully GDPR compliant after more than 5 years. So, let's see if we manage to to have it a little bit better and create a little bit more legal clarity in the end with the AI Act.
I think the flexibility is a good notion too. It reminds me of how Warren Buffett, if you know who he is, how he
Yeah.
runs his company Berkshire Hathaway. So it's very decentralized in some ways, where because the only rule he has is don't do anything that's going to ruin a reputation.
Yes.
And that's it.
Yeah.
Every shareholder meeting he has, the only thing he shows is a video of a testimony he gave to U.S. Congress when he was leading Solomon Brothers, and they had he was brought in because they had some ethical issues going on, like
Yeah.
theft and other stuff. So there's also legal issues actually, but so the thing he said is ruin a if you lose money, it's fine. If you lose reputation, I'm going to be quite ruthless on you. And what he said when people asked him about that, he said that if you have too many fine points in your rules, people are just going to find loopholes around that.
Yeah.
If you have something that's fairly flexible, it's there's enough ambiguity where people are free to interpret it how they want, and
Yeah.
as long as it's in the spirit of what you're trying to convey, then it tends to take care of itself. So, and I think with something like AI, it would be impossible to come up with like a 1,000-point checklist that you have to abide by as a company.
Exactly.
Because just
Exactly.
for one, it's unrealistic, and two, it's just like things change so fast, it would be
Yeah.
irrelevant.
Exactly.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I think there are also a lot of best practices that we see all around the world. And for example, I'm a big fan of the US NIST agency or the
Mm,
Turing Institute in London, and so on and so on. And my hope is that we are a little bit, not copy pasting exactly what our friends in the United States or in the UK are doing, but really trying to learn from each other and also using
yeah.
those international organizations like OECD as a kind of platform to exchange experiences and good methods to maybe address certain risks and so on. So I think it's really about bringing the AI community together and
Mm.
quickly also adapt there and help each other out.
That's interesting. So, one question I have is if I'm a company, doesn't matter where it is. Let's say I'm a company in the EU, just because you
Yeah,
hit on the fact that even companies in the EU and organizations are having trouble with GDPR. And this act is expected to maybe be finalized end of year, right?
yeah.
Or thereabouts. Are there any steps I can do to start preparing now for the act, or should I just wait for the act to be done and then I can start worrying about it?
Yeah. Well, there is a transition period of probably 2 years, which would mean, well, if we have the political agreement at the end of the year until the law is really published in the so-called official journal of the European Union, it will take another 6 months. So probably if everything works out well, the law will be adopted in the summer of next year. And then on top, you have this 2 years of transition period. So the law will only apply to everyone in 26 in the summer. Actually, again, I do not know if it's then already outdated because it's 2.5 years from now, or almost 3 years. No, it's basically 3 years from now. We will need to see. But this means, on the other hand, that companies still have a lot of time to prepare. I think the AI Act is already quite advanced. So you see at least the direction where we are heading. And so there are, for example, now certain obligations for so-called high-risk AI systems that
Hmm.
companies could already try to integrate in their product and services. And what companies also should really do is really become very engaged in standardization bodies in the member
Hmm.
states, because again, the whole AI Act is really based on technical standards, and this is a good way how companies can maybe also give feedbacks that certain things are not possible, and therefore also the standard should be giving a lot of flexibility and room to fulfill or apply those standards. I think this is the best way at the moment for companies to really prepare of what will come in 26.
Is the EU helping broker these discussions with companies and standards bodies, or is it up to companies to figure out on their own? I mean,
Yeah,
because if I'm a company, I'm like, I wouldn't even know where to start. I would like call
yeah,
Kai up and say, "Hey, Kai, like, who do I talk to?"
yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, the governments are not really helpful, I would say, in most member states of the European Union. So I think companies um, get help from trade associations. So,
mm,
like in the United States, the U.S. Chambers of Commerce, or ITI, or BSA, or all your digital trade associations. I think those counterparts in the European Union are quite active and are really trying to push their companies more in the standardization. And there are certain member states, or former member states, again going to the UK, they have really also public programs. The Turing Institute, for example, is now creating an AI standardization hub. And this hub
hmm,
is really trying to connect, especially the smaller market players, startups, SMEs, and so on, together, bring them together, form some, let's say, overviews or position papers, and then bring those position papers in standardization bodies. So it actually depends a little bit on the member states where you have your headquarter. But I think the easiest way, again, is to go via trade associations.
interesting. Huh. Yeah, I'm curious how the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is getting educated on this and transmitting that, because a lot of the trade associations in the U.S. and the United States, like Chamber of Commerce, they tend to be, you see, for lack of a better word, very old school.
Yeah,
So, I mean, these are people
yeah.
that can like barely turn on their computer. So,
Yeah,
so,
yeah, yeah.
so it'll be interesting.
It's the same here in Europe. We have also
Okay.
very, very traditional ways, let's say, of thinking and so on. But I would say more and more people are really realizing how important standards are. And especially,
Yeah.
I would say in the United States, probably ITI is a good bet. So
Okay.
I think they are rather advanced in their thinking, and yeah. So I think most companies in the US, if they already now want to get involved, they would find some organizations who could help them.
And actually, this brings up a good question. So, for people who want to learn about the Act online, um, speaking for a friend, so um, it seems like when I went on Google, for example, right, it
Yeah,
seemed like there were a lot of commercial websites that were posing as the authoritative
yeah,
EU Act, AI Act information repository, and then you come to find out they're just trying to get you on their mailing list so they can send you a
yes.
bunch of stupid spam. I mean, is there? What do you recommend as like the official documentation or
Yeah,
summary of what I should know?
yeah. So now we are coming in a direction where the European Union really needs to improve, because
Okay,
our transparency and accessibility of European laws and also future laws, in my opinion, is really a disaster. So even myself, who is now working almost 7 years in the European Parliament, often struggles to find the right documents, to find a good overview and so on, because I don't know what they are doing and how they are doing those mistakes and repeating those mistakes, but they are
interesting.
really bad in storing the data on the right website or the right section and so on. So again, I think there are some trade associations, also NGOs, maybe also certain universities that are making good overviews. Yeah, personally, I also have a blog where I'm, for example, posting all the latest documents and so on. And unfortunately, I think it's those private, either really from an individual or from a private company or from a private organization that are currently the only um, sources where you are really getting a good overview. And you said it, we have the same with the GDPR, that there are a lot of commercial actors like law firms, like
Yeah.
consultancies, like other companies that are making a business out of it, no? That yeah, that offer certificates, that are offering trainings and so on. I think people in governments, people in the parliament here and also in the member states, they are realizing that this is really more and more a problem, and they are now trying to also draft certain guidance, certain websites, and so on. But yeah, I think European governance or member states, they are often very slow. So they have also very traditional ways of thinking and so on. And again, in
Yeah.
the end, the outcome is often not really helpful so far. But let's
Oh,
see.
great.
As an optimist, maybe they will manage it until 26.
Yeah, yeah. Let's won't be keeping my fingers crossed on that. It's interesting because it's something I did notice in my spring tour in Europe. So I was traveling on Europe giving talks. I think that's how I came across you. Actually, we were talking at the same conference in
Yeah.
Munich, the ML Ops conference.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and the thing I noticed over and over was just how slow the companies move there.
Yeah.
It was shocking, even by American standards. Like there are companies that move fast and there are companies that move slow, but even our slowest
Yeah.
company would be fast in
Yeah.
Europe,
Yes.
which is kind of insane. And
Yes.
so, what's interesting is what you mentioned about sort of the approach of educating the public on this, right? And then I'm thinking, okay, so if I'm a European company, I mean, I can barely. Um, my plans are like 2 years ahead, and I'm trudging along towards that. And now this comes along, and it's
Yeah.
yeah, I'm fascinated to see how this plays out.
Yeah.
I don't know,
But
but
what
I
you
do have a
are,
lot of
yeah.
friends who are working on machine learning at these at a lot of big companies in Europe, right? And
Yeah.
so it's happening. But
I think your observation is really top notch. So it's exactly accurate describing the situation, because this is really sad to see that our companies mainly are rather satisfied with the status quo. The European Union was doing quite good in the past, in the 90s and so on. We have our
Mm.
car industry and so on. And people were thinking, well, we are kind of having such a convincing range of products, people will still buy, and therefore there's no need really to innovate, to take risks, and so on. And we talked already about it. Also, I would say there are really differences in the mindset. So in
Oh
Europe,
yeah.
if you fail one time, you are out forever. In the United
Mhm.
States, you can fail several times and you can
Fail
still
every day
make
if you
a
want. Nobody
exactly.
cares.
And then you make a really good startup and you will still get a lot of investments. I think until recently, I really would have said in this blog, Europe will not have any chances on AI, because I agree with you. We are way too slow. Our companies are waiting and so on. It's still applying this assessment to most companies, but recently we have more and more let's call it private initiatives. And actually, when you spoke in Munich, when we were at the same conference, this conference was organized by Applied AI. And Applied AI is one of many initiatives where
Mhm.
very rich people are coming together and are it's not only VCs, but it's also like from our retailers like Lidl, like Aldi,
Lidl
and
was
so
one.
on.
Yeah.
Exactly,
Hmm.
those people are coming together and are saying, okay, we are now investing a few billions, for example, in this AI hub. And then everyone who is coming in this AI app can use a little bit of this money, can try out certain things. And now we have more and more of those places. Recently, there was a new creation in the southwest in Baden-Württemberg. Again, in Munich, we have more and more startups. In Berlin, we have more and more startups. And in those really, let's say, limited fields, there is now a lot of innovation. And those actors there are really pushing the rest of the very slow European
Hmm.
companies also to go forward. And therefore, it's not looking so bad anymore like 5 years
Right.
ago, but we are still, you cannot compare us with US companies that
Oh,
are
you
really
can't. No,
trying out.
I'll give you a perspective too. Like one of my friends, she was running a. She's an American, and she
Yeah,
lives in Berlin and was running um, managing a team over there.
yeah,
Germans, or whoever they were. I don't know if they were Germans, but anyway, not to single anyone out. But her complaint was, in America, if you mess up,
yeah,
you can get fired.
yeah,
In Germany, she would do meetings with her team one-on-ones, and her team would say, "Look, I don't need to listen to you. I
yeah,
I work here, and you can't do anything about it." And that was really frustrating for her because she'd worked at startups, worked at big companies in the United States, and she ultimately she's just like, "I can't deal with this anymore. There's no
yeah,
way. There's no matter how hard we try, they don't work any harder or any there's no incentive for them to get
yeah,
anything done." And so I think
yeah,
there's also, I think, maybe a bit of a cultural thing there as well, where it's just, I definitely met some like very hard charging people who just did fit in really well in America, and other people, it's like, you
yeah,
probably wouldn't last 5 minutes here just
yeah, yeah,
because,
yeah.
you know,
Again, we have a lot of very satisfied people that do not see the need to innovate, to give 150% every day, and so on. And especially in Germany, we have also a lot of former state-run companies. And in those state-run
mm,
companies, you basically, yeah, like your friend was observing, you cannot get fired. So even if you just never come to work and really not do anything, they cannot fire you. And of course, in those companies, then it's really difficult to find even a small group of people who will give everything that is necessary to really bring forward a
mm-hmm.
new project. But again, I think in the last years, maybe also by integrating so many brilliant people from Canada, from the United States, from UK, from Brazil, from Thailand, and so on, our teams are becoming more and more international. And in those
Yeah.
hubs in Munich, in Berlin, in Hamburg, and so on, we have now really international teams. And then I think people are really pushing each other. And
Yeah.
I think this is why now, especially in Europe, it's often the smaller market players that are really bringing forward innovation,
Mhm.
while this all old former state-run companies, yeah, they do not manage. They are too slow. They have too many satisfied people, and yeah, I think they will lose the connection to the most advanced projects and most advanced technologies, because I think they are just not able to integrate them in their products.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, but it is good. Like when I went to the Applied AI, conference there and saw what they're doing, I was like, this is cool. It's
Yeah,
it's a tech hub, and Munich is. I think the city of Munich was participating in that as well. So that it was a
yeah,
cool initiative to see. Definitely reminded me of stuff you'd see in the States. And to me, it's like you can complain about the past. That's great. It is what it is. Like
yeah,
Europe has a lot of history, so there's a lot of
yeah,
past to complain about. But uh, at the same time, it's like but balancing again against the EU Act, the AI
yeah,
Act, right, and what you guys are trying to do with that. It's like you're trying to. It's not like in the States where we just wait for problems to happen and then we deal with them.
yeah,
Which I think there's some good to that and like some terrible parts of that as well. Like because
yeah,
here you can't get anyone. You could have groups looking at the same clock and they wouldn't agree what time it is. It's just how
exactly.
it is here, and
Yeah,
so nothing ever gets done here from a legal perspective. It
yeah,
just is what it is, right?
yeah,
The courts are now deciding everything, not the lawmakers.
yeah,
And so, but in Europe, it seems like at least you guys are like taking the initiative to get ahead of a situation that I think inevitably is going to impact people.
exactly,
It is.
exactly.
So,
And I think one good realization that policymakers, again here in Europe, had over the last years is that all those digital laws do not really make sense if you are not enforcing them. And
yeah.
again, we saw it with privacy stuff, so GDPR. There are a lot of companies, big companies, that are violating against certain rules and articles, but nothing happens, or even if they are in front of a court, it will take 10 years or even longer to really go to the final judgments. And then it's, of course, for a company sometimes financially even better to break rules, because then they have 10 years until they really need to stop a certain product or service. And I
Oh yeah.
think there again, now Europe is starting to realize, okay, we need to be faster. We need to also face all those very smart tactics from especially big tech companies, and yeah, become also smarter in how our ways to address those concerns. No? But again, it's really early time, and let's see if it's working out, our alternative approaches to the digital field.
Oh, we will find out. So that's awesome. Well, yeah, thanks for the conversation, Kai. I learned a
Sure.
ton that I did not know before. And I guess yeah, we'll just stay in touch, see where it goes. So end of year, that's is there a specific date or is that just sort of the general time frame that's being
Yeah,
planned on?
it's a general time frame. Let me check the calendar. So our parliament calendar is going until the 15th of December.
Okay.
And this is really a hard deadline, because then Christmas period is starting and there are no meetings anymore allowed between the policymakers, at least on an official level. So if we really want to finalize the AI Act before the European election, which is next year already, we need to have a final agreement, at least informally, until this day. So it's actually the 15th of December.
Oh, okay.
And because there is so much political pressure and so many people, as I said at the beginning, are now connected with this AI Act and want to also use it in the European election as a kind of political
Mm.
victory, I think there will be a lot of pressure to really finalize everything until Christmas.
Oh wow. How far do you think that gap is between where you are today? I think there was a vote in June or something, and
Yeah.
basically December 15th. Like how close is that gap?
Yeah, so the vote was in the European Parliament. It works here in the European Union always in this way that the Parliament and the member states need to first, among themselves, agree on a position, and then member states and Parliament on a second level, let's say, need to again meet with each other for the first time and then agree among themselves, so member states and parliamentarians. And we are now in the second stage. But now just started to rediscuss basically everything that before
Okay.
we discussed among each other. So let's see. We are just starting now. We have basically 6 months with the summer break included. So it will
Oh,
be really, really, really tight. But what is helping maybe is that we are on a few, or not only a few points. We have a lot of points where we are now thinking quite similar. So I think there is a chance again, especially with the political pressure behind us.
yeah. That's so fascinating. Interesting. Well, we'll see how it goes. Good luck. So,
Thank
but I'm looking
you. We
forward to
need
it.
it.
Yeah, and yeah.
We need it.
Well, cool. For people who want to learn more about you or the AI Act, how can they do that?
I'm quite active on LinkedIn or on Twitter. And as I said, there's also my blog, so kaizenner.eu. So I think one of those three ways is rather good to reach me, to keep being updated on the recent developments with the AI Act. And yeah,
Awesome. Well, thanks, Kai. Learned a lot. So, thank you very
thank
much.
you. And
Yes.
yeah, we can gladly repeat it maybe shortly before we have a final deal at the end of the year, if you wish.
I would love to. Actually, I have a live show on LinkedIn and YouTube, but I'd love to have you on
Yeah,
maybe later in November or December. Yeah, I've actually
gladly.
make a note on that. Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks for your
Perfect.
time, man. It's good to
All
talk to you.
right. Ciao.
So once